Donald Trump is a magician. I don't mean that as a compliment. Magicians run the whole range, from Gandalf to Sauron. I mean it as a description of what he actually does. Trump is in the consciousness manipulation game, and for better or worse, he's pretty good at it. And there's something else. I think he's using astrology. In this video, I'm going to make the case that the President of the United States is a working magician and show you the footage that convinced me. If you're a regular viewer of this channel, you've probably seen this video in which I made my case that some factions of elite society quietly use astrology. I can't prove it, but I think it's highly likely that certain actors, particularly those connected to high finance, are acutely aware of the cycles at work in the world and ancient knowledge of how to take advantage of them. And here we come to Donald Trump. I'm a bit of a naive fellow at times, and honestly speaking, I've fallen for every psyop in the book over the years, but I tend to figure things out eventually. And the first time I started to suspect that Trump and his team were using astrology was just last year. On July the 18th of 2025, Trump signed the Genius Act, which is a law that establishes a regulatory framework to allow the use of dollar-pegged stablecoins in the United States. Now, Trump signed that law just a few days after Uranus's first ingress into the mercurial sign of Gemini. Uranus only changes sign every 7 or 8 years. And actually, if you look back in history, you'll see that every time Uranus has passed through Gemini, the US has undergone some kind of financial and monetary overhaul, something that I've covered on the channel before. Now, Uranus is the planet of technology and sudden inspiration, of disruption and revelation. It provides human beings with those Promethean fire from the gods moments that drive innovation and bring new technology into the world. It's the planet of the genius archetype. And I think that's especially true when it's in a sign like Gemini, which is ruled by Mercury, itself a planet of cleverness, as well as the planet of trade and exchange. Almost immediately after the planet of genius moved into the sign of intelligence and exchange, we see Trump signing the Genius Act. Now, I'm always a little cautious about saying that just because an initiative is timed well, that means that the instigator is using astrology. And the reason for that is that if astrology actually works, which by the way it does, then we'd expect these kinds of temporal and symbolic coincidences to happen anyway. But sometimes it feels like the pudding has been over-egged a bit and you start to suspect the influence of an astrologer. This was one of those occasions. And since then, I've become even more convinced that Trump and his people are using astrology. And what made me feel like that is footage of the event that supercharged his 2024 election campaign, the supposed attempt on his life in Butler, Pennsylvania, in July of 2024. If you're enjoying this video so far, please click the like button, and if you haven't already, please hit subscribe and let YouTube know that you like this kind of thing. And a quick note about this month's live stream. It's called Apocalypse 2040, Cataclysms, Astrology and the Great Year. In this stream, we're going to consider the question of whether, as some fear, a world-resetting cataclysm is on the way. You can purchase entry to the stream on the live streams page of my website, but entry is included for channel members here on YouTube at correspondent tier and for all members of the website. Oh, and one more thing. I'm going to roll out a new benefit for members of World Astrology Report on the website only. I'm going to start sharing the best astrological elections that I've found for each month as a new complimentary subscriber benefit. An astrological election is a moment in time specially chosen for its particular qualities, and taking action at these times can dramatically raise your chances of success at whatever you're undertaking. So stay tuned, website members. Your elections for July will be coming pretty soon. Thanks for listening. Let's get back to the video. On July the 13th of 2024 came a moment that, at least for some, immortalized Donald Trump as a beneficiary of divine intervention when he narrowly avoided being shot, at least apparently. According to the official story, a 20-year-old loner named Thomas Crooks fired 8 rounds at Trump during a campaign rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. An audience member named Corey Comparatore was reportedly killed, and 2 others were critically injured. Trump himself was seemingly nicked in the ear by a bullet. And famously, as his security service protectors were about to usher him off the stage, he mustered the strength to face the audience, pump his fist, and yell, "Fight, fight," with blood pouring down his face. Wait. Forgetting everything else we know about Trump, it seems to have been a remarkable display of courage under fire. Now, cards on the table, I was somewhat skeptical of the official story from the start. It seemed suspicious to me that Crooks had been able to do what he did, get close to the site with a gun, climb a roof in sight of the stage, and let off shots at Trump. I thought presidential Secret Service teams were more competent than that. And the head of the team in charge of his security that day was since made head of the Secret Service. And so I, like many others, wondered if Trump had been the object of some kind of conspiracy and that Crooks wasn't a lone gunman. It seemed plausible to me that the so-called deep state wanted rid of Trump and conspired to bump him off. But I've come to change my mind on that. I'm still skeptical of the official story. But today, I'm not totally convinced it was even a real assassination attempt. Perhaps real bullets were fired because it seems that sadly an audience member really was killed that day. But I'm not sure Trump was ever in real danger. And the reason I changed my mind is the footage I'm about to show you, which shows the Butler event, but from a different angle to what you may have seen before. I've looked into this footage and it seems there's a pretty much unanimous consensus that this is not AI generated. It's fully consistent with other footage of the Butler event, and there are no telltale AI artifacts as far as anybody can tell. So here goes. What we see in the footage is what looks like a member of Trump's security team ushering photographers into position to take pictures of Trump. That's already odd, because why would you be doing that in a situation in which his life was genuinely threatened? And secondly, what I find most suspicious is the way that the US flag is lowered into position, enabling the framing of this very patriotic photograph of Trump. I honestly did not set out to come to this conclusion, but on the basis of that video, I have to lean towards this having been a staged event. Of course, if you don't think such things are possible, or that the powers that be are inclined to do this sort of thing, then you won't trust your eyes here. It's also strange that Trump basically never talks about the assassination attempt now, even though it was only 2 years ago. Most people, you'd think, would be somewhat obsessed with the moment that they were almost publicly assassinated. What's more, recent images of Trump don't show any signs of injury on his ear whatsoever, which again seems odd given that it was supposedly hit with a rifle bullet. And then, on top of all this, the whole story just seems rather unlikely, doesn't it? Let's be real, Trump isn't a soldier, he's a celebrity turned politician. Is it really likely that in the face of imminent danger of death, he'd have the instinct to pick himself up and yell inspiring words to the crowd? And would his security staff really allow him to move back into the angle of view of a potential shooter? I'm sorry, but I'm just not convinced that they would. So, as far as one can ever really know these things, I'm now leaning towards the conclusion that the Butler event was an exercise in stagecraft. And I think that makes a certain kind of sense. Trump is a celebrity president and a master of PR. He knows how to harness the power of narrative to his advantage. The writer Gary Lachman relates a story about Trump from way before he ever entered politics in his book, Dark Star Rising. Quote, "When the board of directors of Holiday Inn asked to see what work was being done on a project that had stalled, Trump arranged for his construction team to pretend to work, with a digger clawing up tons of earth and dumping it on the other side of the site. The board saw what they wanted to see and were duly impressed. Trump got their approval." So Trump has spent decades crafting his own mythology. What better way of bolstering his image than turning himself into the beneficiary of divine intervention, a candidate anointed in blood by the gods? Of course, that didn't persuade most of his sworn political enemies, but in front of an audience of millions of God-fearing Americans whose votes he needed, it must have swayed some of them. One might even say that this was an act of magic. It brought about a change in perception and consciousness. But I think there was something else at work here, something you'll find in most magicians' toolboxes, and that's astrology. Many astrologers managed to predict that something was going to happen to Trump in mid-July, something dangerous and violent. Here's the thumbnail I used for my July 2024 forecast, and here's what I said in that video. On July the 15th, we'll see a conjunction of Mars and Uranus at 26 degrees and 19 minutes of Taurus. In general, this is a volatile and violent configuration of planets. In the Uranian textbook, Rules for Planetary Pictures, Alfred Witter says this of Mars-Uranus: to become suddenly active, sudden event, exciting action, energetic act, bloody injury, over-impulsive action, sudden acts, fighting, wounds. Now, the conjunction is hitting Trump's chart quite directly. It will happen close to his midheaven, which is at 24 Taurus, which is the part of his chart signifying career and public reputation, and it will square Mars on his ascendant. So the astrology was pointing in the direction of Trump potentially becoming the victim of violence, or at least something highly shocking and provocative at that time. The main signifier of this event was a conjunction of Mars and Uranus, which are notoriously volatile, explosive, and even violent combinations of planets. This one perfected very close to Trump's midheaven, the most public point of his natal chart. The conjunction was also squaring Trump's showy Leo Mars on his ascendant, indicating provocation and perhaps even violence affecting him. And of course, that Mars was activated in the most obvious way, in his apparently brave exhortation to the crowd to fight, fight. And one other interesting aspect is that the Mars-Uranus conjunction was conjunct Algol, the dread star of the Medusa's head. Algol, traditionally seen as highly malefic, is often indicating decapitations and accidents affecting the neck and head. Trump very nearly lost his, at least apparently. But you might be thinking that all of this undermines my point about stagecraft. After all, if the astrology pointed towards the possibility of violence affecting Trump, then doesn't that suggest that it was a real event? Well, that's a very good question. To understand what I think may have happened with the Butler event, we need to journey back to ancient Babylon. The oldest astrology that we know about was practiced by the ancient Mesopotamians in today's Iraq. In the late 1st millennium BC, in the Hellenistic period in ancient Alexandria, Babylonian astrology was fused with that of the ancient Egyptians and with Greek religion to create the horoscopic astrology that we're still practicing today. Now, the astrology of the ancient Babylonians was quite different to modern astrology. There was no such thing as a natal chart, and astrology was fundamentally focused on matters of state, and in particular on the health and fate of the king. And eclipses were seen as dangerous omens that could portend the death of a monarch. And so the ancient Babylonians devised a cunning ritual, what's known today as the substitute king ritual. What would happen is that if the king's astrologers detected a dangerous omen that suggested the king was in mortal danger, then a substitute, often a criminal or a foreign captive or someone of low status, would be chosen to play the role of king during the period of effect of that eclipse. He would be dressed up as the king would dress and sit on the throne and even be given a queen to rule with him. And he'd typically play this role pretending to be king for about 100 days. And then, once the omen was deemed to have passed, he'd be killed. And in this way, the omen that said that the king would die could be said to have come true, and the gods were appeased. Then the real king would come back and start ruling once again. Now, what can we take from that? Well, it suggests that the Babylonians believed that the gods could be tricked or negotiated with, and that ritual, properly performed, could satisfy or redirect divine will. The substitute king ritual is essentially a form of remediation, which in astrology speak means performing certain ritual actions to prevent harm indicated by difficult astrological indications. But what does this have to do with Trump and Butler? Well, I'd suggest that if Butler was indeed staged, then that day was probably carefully chosen by somebody with astrological knowledge. They identified that time as one posing a danger to Trump, and so they scheduled it for the performance of this great ritual. Perhaps it was both a way of remediating the danger that the astrology posed to Trump and using that crisis as a great opportunity, one that ended up turning Trump, at least in some eyes, into a kind of divinely ordained hero. In other words, it looks to me like this was a magical ritual. And that prompts the question, is Trump a magician? If we're going to consider the possibility that Donald Trump is some kind of magician, we're going to need a definition of what magic is. I like the famous magician Dion Fortune's definition, which is that magic is the art and science of causing changes in consciousness in conformity with will. You'll notice that there's nothing necessarily quote-unquote supernatural about that. As I discussed in my video on the elite use of astrology, even something like modern advertising with its incantations and sigils is a form of magic. This definition of magic is a recognition that the fundamental base layer of reality is consciousness, not matter. And if we can manipulate consciousness, whether that's ours or other people's, we can change reality. And Trump is, it seems to me, a master of doing this. As soon as he entered the political scene in 2015, he immediately managed to command the news cycle and never really let it go. By doing and saying a continuous stream of things that he probably knew the mainstream media deemed outrageous, he managed to appear on the front pages of every newspaper and website almost every day for years on end. He turned himself into a notorious figure, but one that ended up living rent-free in everybody's heads, whether they loved him or hated him. And that's a form of magic. Now, whether Trump consciously knows what he's doing or just has a kind of instinct for it is, for me, an open question. But it's almost beside the point. The point is that he does it, and he does it pretty effectively. And this idea of Trump the magician is circling quite widely now. You may at some point have come across this clip on social media. Sinister Serbian performance artist Marina Abramović talking about Trump as a magician.
The Trump is the best thing happened ever to us. Because she believed, not her, but the entire population of this Nordic magician, that he is the magician of the highest order. That he is there in his irrational mind to create confusion in order, that the human being can find new order. And it's not so stupid thinking about this in that way. It's completely turning things upside down. Because since Trump is around, things are changing.
Now, despite all the claims on the internet that Abramović is giving her personal opinion here, it's pretty clear from the clip that she's reporting someone else's opinion about Trump here, rather than making these statements herself. I have no love for what she does or her so-called art. She seems to me to be some kind of black magician who does public rituals disguised as performance art. It's all very unseemly, but for some reason the richest of the rich love this stuff. Anyway, this isn't a video about Abramović. It seems to me that in her comments on Trump, this is a case of game recognizing game. She knows a magician when she sees one because she is one. What's also interesting is that Trump now seems to be deliberately playing up to this image. Back in April, he posted this AI-generated image showing him seemingly healing a sick man. It looked very much like he was sacrilegiously posing as Jesus Christ, and the controversy was such that he ended up having to delete that image, which is quite a rarity for him. But others had a different take on this. They focused on the outfit that Trump was wearing, a white robe and a red cape, and they noted that it was basically identical to the outfit worn by the magician in the Rider-Waite tarot. What's especially weird is that the image Trump posted had actually been posted months earlier by some MAGA fan, but with one crucial difference. On the left, you can see the original image. The image Trump posted had seemingly been altered, changing one of the soldiers emerging from the clouds into a horned figure that some suggested looked like a demon. It's hard to fathom how that could have happened. Was it added by a mischievous staffer? Or was it there on purpose, serving as a kind of signal to those in the know? Is this a case of revelation of the method? Whatever it is, it's confusing, it's chaotic, and that is in essence Trump's operating style these days. He seems to exist to sow chaos and confusion and to leave people feeling unmoored and unsure of what's really going on in the world and where it's heading. And so it seems to me that Trump the magician is really here to create chaos. And here comes to mind the Masonic motto, Ordo ab Chao, order from chaos. The question we should be asking is, what's the order that Trump, the magician of chaos, is here to create the conditions for? And I think I know. I think he's here to facilitate the construction of the digital control grid. In the bonus section of this video, available for channel members here on YouTube and members of my website, worldastrologyreport.com, we consider the wider astrological conditions that mean that somebody like Trump is able to win the presidency and what he's here to do. If you enjoyed this video, then I suggest you watch this one, which I mentioned earlier, in which I consider the question of whether factions of today's most powerful, so-called elites might be using astrology. Thanks for watching, and see you again on the channel very soon.